Here, I'd also recommend Naomi Oreskes' book, Why Trust Science, that I just read. She's very good. She's very good on this. Naomi has a bunch of examples, including from climate science, to pick a super relevant topic. When you hear about the climate consensus by the IPCC, here's our paper, we 10,000 scientists, and here's what they think. Okay. Well, this isn't a democracy. Like they just meet on the weekends and go, okay, show of hands, how many think anthropogenic global warming is real? No, it's not like that at all. It's that, you take, say, 10,000 published peer-reviewed journal papers on climate science, and what percentage conclude anthropogenic global warming is real? Well, 97%. That's where that number comes from. Well, what about the other 3%? Maybe they're right. In the history of science, sometimes the minority people or even just one person turns out to be right and the whole group is wrong. Well, yes, that's possible. But in this case, there's so many independent scientists working in completely different fields. You got the guy studying glaciers, and this one studies sunspots, and that one studies volcano. This one studies ocean acidification. This one studies the rise of sea level. This one studies, flowering plants and when they start to bloom in the spring. This one studies bird behavior. They don't meet on the weekends to get their story straight so they can destroy, conservative American capitalism because we're all socialists. Yeah, there's no conspiracy. They don't even know each other. They don't publish the same journals. They don't go to the same conferences, and they're all coming to the same conclusion. So that increases my confidence that, this is probably true, because it's not like they're all deluded in the same direction.
It's one of the distinguishing factors between science and other methods of truth, I find, is that science, you don't have to have a common shared community upbringing. You don't have to have it passed down from your parents. You don't have to live in the same place. You don't have to have the same skin color. You don't have to have the same religious background. It's such a diverse group of people coming to the same answer that bias seems outrageous.
Yeah, very unlikely. Same thing with evolutionary theory. We're confident because, this convergence of evidence from multiple lines of inquiry, paleontology and geology and comparative anatomy and comparative physiology and lots of genetics, the fossil record, they're all converging to the same conclusion, common ancestor and so on. And so it's not like they could possibly be totally deluded by some overarching ideology that clouds everybody's thinking. And yes, there are the occasional skeptics. They're almost always turns out to be, they're Christian conservatives, or they have some motive there. Intelligent design creation is the latest version from old age versus young age creationism, and so on. There's occasional real scientists that has no religious motive, but they're very rare, and they're usually outside of the field. Like when Fred Hoyle, the cosmologist who promoted the steady state theory in contrast with the Big Bang theory, he famously did some calculations and showed that evolution would be the equivalent of a jumbo jet, all the parts of a jumbo jet in a big warehouse coming together to form the perfect jump, by chance. And of course, people like Dawkins just destroyed this argument. It's not random. It's cumulative selection. And this just comes from ignorance, just that he didn't know what he was talking about. And so you have to have some knowledge of the field.
He actually coined the term Big Bang as a derogatory term for the expanding universe postulate.
Right. Yeah, that's Bang. Right. Yeah. Well, it turns out that was true, even though he didn't mean it.
So, anti-science sentiment seems to be everywhere and growing. One of the reasons I started this podcast is I felt like I've been losing the battle, coming from the space age and man on the moon, and I feel like we're going backwards in a lot of ways. Nuclear power in the 70s, and now we're back to sticks and rocks and wind. Skepticism has a bad name in society right now. A large fraction of the populace are taught to value faith as a core tenet. Obviously, as a religious, a large portion of the populace is religious, and faith is held up. Don't question. Faith is a value that you should have. And scientists are painted in a bad light because they, quote, don't believe in anything. How did we get such a bad name, and how do we fix it?
Yeah, well, a couple of things there. I think on the plus side of things, most people are not anti-science, even those who we call anti-science because they deny global warming. Say, it's almost always just one particular hot button issue that bugs them. In the case of climate sciences, conservatives who hold, kind of free market economic policy, libertarian economic policy, and they feel like this is going to be a curb on economic growth and so on.
Hmm.
Nothing to do with the science. It's just like, oh my God, if this is true, then the libtards are going to pass all this legislation and ruin our economy, right? Um, but they go to doctors, they fly in planes, they accept the germ theory of disease, and so on, and so it's not just anti-science across the board. Almost everybody has a particular hot button issue. Christians with evolution say, only certain denominations, by the way. Most other religions have come around to accepting evolution, including Catholics.
Mhm.
So it's usually just focused on one thing. So there we can target that one thing and get them to accept the science without having to give up their core belief, because they're not going to give that up. So the example I use, if you give somebody a Christian who's worried about evolution, if you make them choose between Darwin and Jesus, they're not picking the down of sage. They're not picking the English naturalist. He's out, right? Because he doesn't offer eternal life. So you just have to take that off the table. Look, this evolutionary biology has nothing to do with religion, faith, nothing like that. Yeah, and here, read Francis Collins' book, The Language of God. He's a staunch defender of evolutionary theory. He's almost as articulate as Richard Dawkins, not quite, because nobody is, but he's good. It's a staunch defense of evolutionary theory, mainly through genetics. He was the head of the Human Genome Project. His credentials are pretty good, and he's an evangelical Christian. So there, I use the kind of team politics angle. He's on your team. He's a major player on your team. He's head of the National Institutes of Health. He's a major figure, and he totally accepts evolution. And that always gives people a start, like, oh, huh, all right.
Hmm.
So I guess I can accept the science without giving up my Christian beliefs. Yes, you can. Okay. Well, I'll take another look at that, right? And you have to do that.
Yeah,
So
there's a statement
that's
out there called Voices for Evolution. And I think most major religions are coming out in favor of scientific descriptions of origins as being fine and not contradictory with their faith.
Yes, that's right. So Francis has an organization called Biologos, which is theistic evolution is their approach. So it's kind of a God-directed evolution. In other words, they accept all aspects of evolution, except maybe the moral values come from evolution. I think they don't accept that. Although a lot of liberal, left-leaning evolutionary biologists don't accept that either. They feel it's entirely cultural. That's a separate issue. But for the someone like Francis Collins, the whole thing is directed from on top. Not that God tinkers with every species, every newborn. That God designed the laws of nature to unravel and I should say unfold as they do. The original meaning of embryology is unfolding,
Uh-huh.
including embryological unfolding, would be itself just kind of built into the laws of genetics,
Hmm.
say in this example, and building proteins from DNA and so forth. That all just happens naturally because that's the way God designed it. So therefore, you don't have to give up anything. And Darwin made a similar argument in the second edition of The Origin of Species. He addressed the challenge to theism claims made against him, saying, I don't see why everybody's upset about this. In Newton's time, they were worried about Newtonian mechanics, taking God out of the picture. But in fact, most people came to accept the fact that, well, that's how God creates solar systems. He uses gravity.
You don't
Oh,
need
okay.
angels to push the planets around in their orbits anymore.
That's right. Yeah. The whole system just runs itself, the mechanical clockwork. And maybe that's how God is the diversity of life. He used natural selection and sexual selection. Oh, okay. So that is a clever strategy. I mean, Darwin didn't believe that, but that's a strategy you could use. And it's not anti-science to think that. It's just, it's a different level of analysis. It has nothing to do with science.
Hmm. I think that there seems to be in society a huge resurgence in magical thinking, though. I mean, it's not that necessarily people are anti-science. Maybe they just don't think of it. But I mean, back in the mid 20th century, science was trusted and superstitious woo was generally dismissed, in my opinion. I mean, my anecdote for this is Scooby-Doo. If you ever watch
Of
Scooby-Doo,
course I know
the
Scooby. Of course I
cartoon,
love
I
Scooby.
love that cartoon as a child. And they always unmasked the villain. It was always someone who had a reason to be dressing up as a ghost. Well, then I watched it.
Right.
They had a reboot, and my kids were watching it, and there was real ghosts, and it was
Really?
yeah,
Oh no,
yeah, there were real
Scooby.
superstitious stuff going on and ghosts, and I was like,
Oh
what
no,
the
I'm so
heck? They've
sorry to hear
ruined it,
that.
and
Well,
and
maybe,
this
who
is
knows? I mean, whoever the writers are, maybe they got swept up by some new age movement or something. I don't know. The trend lines, the polling data is very inconsistent about this. That is to say, since like the 60s, are paranormal beliefs going up or down? Well, it depends on which poll you're looking at and which claim is being analyzed. Some go up, some go down. And so we have the Skeptic Research Center now that we're funding, and have a couple of my ex-graduate students, now professors, running this. And we're launching this year in 2021 a big study on this, try to figure out what is exactly people believe, because it's hard to say, because it also depends very much on the wording that you use, to what extent people believe it. If you say, is it possible that there could be something to this claim? Yeah. Oh, the average person will go, yeah, I guess I'll tick that box. Versus, do you think this is exactly what happened? Well, no. So the wording very much determines what you're going to capture there. Aside from, is it a statistically random sample from the population? Is your N large enough to be representative? And so on and so forth. Of course, you do all that. That's expensive to do, by the way. I'm spending something like, not me, the skeptics, but I think it was like $30,000 to conduct a really good study on this.
wow.
With like an N of like I think it was like an N of 20,000 over the course of 4 different big studies we're conducting in the next 6 months. And this another pressure on how science is done. It just takes money to really do it right. You got to make sure that you're getting what you got to run some trial studies of the questions. In my mind, when I ask, do you think QAnon is real? Say, for example, is the person reading it, are they thinking the same thing I'm thinking? Because maybe they're not thinking that. Maybe they're thinking something completely different. I can't get in their head, right? So polling self-report data is always problematic in the social sciences. So you have to run these trials to make sure that the content validity is there, that you're really actually measuring what you think you're measuring. Another complexity of the social sciences. So
this is one of the reasons they only use 95% as their standard rather than 99.9999.
yeah,
It's easy to pull electrons and much cheaper.
But to your larger question, it's not true that things are getting worse. It's just not clear whether they're getting better or worse. We just don't know.
Well, that's
and again, it gets bumped around also by pop culture things like, exorcisms were pretty big after The Exorcist, and belief in demons and that kind of stuff. And then that kind of went away for a while, and then other things popped up depending on what was popular in films and things like that, or how many people watch Scooby-Doo. All that matters. Conspiracy theories come and go. I mean, the JFK was the mother of all conspiracy theories until 9/11. And then 9/11 was bumped off the stage by the birthers, and then the birthers were bumped off the stage by QAnon and the rigged election stuff. And so that kind of comes and goes. So it's hard to say with long-term trends. I mean, we could look historically, say the last 500 years. And, when you read historians' accounts of what people believed, say in 1500, it was pretty superstitious. I mean, almost pretty much everybody believed, of course, in God, but not just God and demons, and not just demons, but witches. And there was even a scholarly discussion about this. If demons are not real, here was the sequence. If witches are not real, because there was some pushback, like, this thing about women flying on brooms, what? I mean, maybe this is all bullshit. And they go, well, hang on now. If witches are not real, then maybe demons aren't real. And if demons aren't real, maybe the devil doesn't exist. And no devil, no God. It's like, hang on now. Let's not go too far down this road of skepticism here.
The Rational View is a weekly series hosted by me, Dr. Alan Scott, providing a rational, evidence-based perspective on important societal issues.